Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here is, as always, to take a really dense stack of source material, often abstract, often pretty complex, and just distill it all down.
Right, to get to the absolute most important insights you need to know.
Exactly. And today we're taking that whole concept of distillation and, we're applying it to something incredibly personal.
Yeah, intensely personal. We're talking about the internal architecture of the human self. This isn't about external forces, not really. We're looking at the foundational operating system, the OS of human motivation and behavior.
I like that, the operating system. We're tracing the internal wiring, basically, the drivers that end up dictating our thoughts, our feelings, and ultimately our actions.
And the source material we have today is, well, it's remarkably focused. It's this concentrated analysis that lays out a fundamental dual structure for how we operate. It maps out these two primary and often competing internal engines.
Competing engines, right, that's the key.
It is. And the structure is. I'd almost say it's elegant because it identifies these really specific catalysts for two universal human experiences.
Okay, so what are they?
Well, on one hand, you have the spiritual and intellectual drive, which the source explicitly says is channeled through the Quran. And on the other hand, you have the emotional, the affective drive, which it links primarily to songs and entertainment.
So knowledge versus emotion.
In a way, yeah. This framework gives us an incredibly structured way to view how these constant internal forces are shaping our external reality, what the source actually refers to as our suluk, which is, you could call it our guided behavior.
Okay, so this is like an operational manual for the soul. Let's unpack it. Our mission today, I think it's threefold.
Right.
First, we have to rigorously define what the source calls the primary engine, this engine of conscience. Second, we really need to understand the other one, the powerful, almost reactive engine of emotion.
And third,
And third, and this is maybe the most important part, we have to analyze the solution, the simple but really profound prescription the source offers for achieving a sustainable, balanced life.
and before we jump into all that, here's a thought for you, our listener. If you had to identify the main force driving your most recent, significant life decision, maybe a career change or a big purchase, or even just how you handled a conflict, what was it?
Yeah, was it informed knowledge and like long-term guidance, or was it
Or was it raw, immediate emotion? Something sparked by what you saw or heard or felt in that exact moment.
because the sources we're looking at, they argue these two forces are constantly at play, cyclically, aggressively even, and they're defining the quality of your decisions, in every single moment.
Absolutely.
And we are going to dive into the nuts and bolts of how those two forces compete and, maybe more importantly, how they're actually supposed to complement each other.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. We begin with what the source material, it unequivocally names it as the foundational starting point, the absolute primary engine, the thing that provides internal stability.
Right. And it declares that the Quran is the fundamental catalyst. The original phrasing is so crucial here. It's al-Muharrik al-Asasi,
Which means,
the primary driver, the prime mover, you could almost say. And that specific designation, al-Muharrik al-Asasi, it immediately elevates the Quran from, just being a spiritual text to being an operational input for the human psyche.
an operational input.
And the domain it influences is crystal clear. It's named as the primary driver of the conscience. That's the direct quote.
So that's the first critical link in the chain. Spiritual knowledge directly activates and guides the conscience.
That's the one. Quran to conscience.
But this isn't just semantics, is it? This is defining a whole hierarchy of self-governance. We have to pause here and really ask, what exactly is the conscience, Aldemir, in this model? Because the source is, it sounds highly technical about its function. It's way more than just a simple moral whisper.
Oh, absolutely. That's the essential point. The source material defines the conscience as al-Mutahakim.
Al-Mutahakim.
Yeah. It means the controller, the governor, the central regulator. It's the unit that's responsible for governing all of our core outputs, our behavior, our thoughts, and our feelings.
Wow. So if we're looking for a modern analogy, the conscience isn't the map. It's the entire operating system. It's the central processing unit, the CPU.
That is a perfect analogy. And the Quran, in that analogy, provides the foundational software, the ethical programming, if you will, that lets that CPU run optimally.
And make accurate calculations about behavior.
Exactly. Without that programming, that specific software, the CPU just defaults to its factory settings, to raw instinct.
Okay, so when the conscience is driven by the Quran, It's acting as the master filter. It's governing all cognitive, behavioral, and emotional outputs.
Think of it like a quality control mechanism on a really high-stakes assembly line. Every single thought, every feeling, every action has to pass through this filter of guided, informed conscience before it gets released into the world as actual behavior.
So let's detail the full sequence. The direct path that gets initiated by this spiritual study, let's call it, I don't know, chain A.
Okay, chain A. The hierarchy is clear. The Quran feeds the conscience, which then directs the feelings.
Quran, then conscience, then feelings. The order is so important here.
It's vital because it completely changes the nature of the feelings themselves. This path suggests that feelings aren't just these, arbitrary, raw impulses that pop up out of nowhere.
Right, they're the result of a process.
Exactly. They are the result of a process that has already been filtered through an internal ethical monitor, the conscience, which itself is grounded in knowledge or ilm.
So when your feelings emerge from this chain, from chain A, they're proactively guided. They're informed responses, not just knee-jerk reactions.
You've got it. That's the proactive governance model.
It provides internal stability. Your response, even to really intense external stuff, is channeled. Your feelings are still there, they're acknowledged, but they're being moderated by this guiding software.
Which makes this primary engine one of proactive governance. But like you said, the sources are just as meticulous when they describe the deficit. What happens when this whole foundation is missing?
Right, the system failure.
And it is a catastrophic failure. This isn't presented as, a slight inconvenience. The sources see it as a complete and total failure of the internal navigation system. They detail 4 specific deficits for a person without the Quran.
Okay, let's walk through them. What's the first one?
The first one defines the starting vacuum. It says a person without the Quran is a person lacking knowledge, ilm.
And knowledge, ilm, is the essential stabilizing input. We're not just talking about religious trivia here. In this framework, it's the fundamental moral and ethical structure that actually defines a functioning consciousness.
That's it. And this lack of knowledge, it immediately triggers the next deficit. This is the default setting of the unguided self.
Which is?
When that foundational knowledge is absent, the person follows their own inclination or desire. The text says, yatabi hawa.
They follow their hawa, their desire.
It's presented as an immediate, totally predictable consequence of that moral vacuum.
That's a really deep philosophical point right there. The source is arguing that desire, hawa, rushes in to fill the empty space left by the absence of knowledge, ilm.
Yes. The self cannot remain neutral.
Yeah.
It's not possible. If it is not governed by foundational knowledge, it will, by default, be governed by immediate subjective inclination. There is no middle ground. There's no third option.
So going back to your CPU analogy, if you don't install the correct operating system, the Quran, the knowledge, the system will just run whatever rogue, buggy background program happens to pop up first.
Which is desire, inclination, and the output will be chaotic, unpredictable.
And the final 2 deficits, I assume, are the real-world consequences of that chaos, the navigational failures.
That's right. The consequences for the person's suluk, their behavior. Without the Quran, they fail to find guidance towards good.
Ilah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And they lack protection from evil. Yubidu and al-Shar.
So they can't find the good, and they can't avoid the bad.
These last 2 points show the full collapse of the moral structure. The conscience, deprived of its ilm, cannot perform its fundamental duty as a mutahakim, the controller. It can't act as a map, guiding the person towards constructive paths, the shar.
And it can't act as a shield, protecting them from destructive ones, the shar.
So the individual is truly adrift, just tossed around by every immediate desire that comes up, because the very mechanism for telling good from evil has been disabled. It's been starved of its foundational input.
Wow. So to summarize this primary engine, it's all about stability. The Quran provides the foundational knowledge, the ilm, which fuels the conscience, al-damir. That conscience then acts as the central filter, al-mutahakim, making sure that feelings and behaviors, the suluk, are proactively aligned with enduring ethical principles.
And by doing so, it prevents the collapse into subjective desire, into hawa.
That paints an incredibly powerful picture of necessity. It's not just a nice-to-have, it's the core of a stable system.
Precisely. Which brings us to the other side of the equation.
Right.
Now we have to transition. We go from the intellectual and moral foundation to the effective core of the self. We have to address the human necessity for emotion, for experience.
The other engine.
The other engine. If the Quran is the foundational driver of the conscience, the sources identify songs and entertainment Alagani wa Altarfe, as the primary catalyst for the emotional sphere.
So they are explicitly named as the primary driver of feelings and emotions.
Yes. Almuharik alasasi lil mashaer, the primary driver of feelings. This shift is profound. It's an acknowledgement that the emotional self also requires external stimulus. It needs activation, just like the conscience needs intellectual stimulus.
It needs fuel.
It needs fuel. And the sources are careful not to limit this influence. It's not just about happiness. They detail the specific wide emotional spectrum that songs are said to drive. It covers the full gamut of human effect.
What are the examples they give?
They list love, hate, happiness, and sadness. It's a clear recognition that entertainment is a powerful lever for the entire internal emotional state, not just the positive parts.
You know, that list is so important because today we often categorize entertainment purely as escapism or, just chasing joy.
Feel good content.
Exactly. But the inclusion of hate and sadness shows that the source understands that humans actively seek out effective input across the entire spectrum. We listen to certain music specifically to process grief or to amplify a sense of righteous anger. Altarfe is about emotional activation, period, regardless of the quality of that emotion.
And we have to ground this in a modern context for the listener. When the source talks about Alagani wa Altarfi songs and entertainment, we have to acknowledge that today that includes a vast landscape of stimuli. It's way beyond just music.
Oh, for sure. It's streaming media, it's social media feeds, it's video games.
Literature, film, all of it. These are all high-intensity, immediate drivers of feelings. And you could argue their influence on the emotional engine is exponentially more powerful now than when this source was originally conceived.
Okay, that brings me to a really critical point of inquiry here about the source's strong claims. Just like we tracked the lack of the Quran to a lack of knowledge, the source makes an equally strong assertion on this side.
It does.
They state unequivocally that a person without songs is a person who lacks feelings, emotions.
It's a challenging statement, no doubt about it. It forces us to ask, is the source suggesting a literal, almost clinical absence of emotion? Like you can't feel anything? Or is it talking about a lack of emotional vibrant activation experience?
That's the question.
My interpretation, based on the whole structure of the source, is that it's the latter. It's about vibrancy and activation.
So the source isn't saying that if you never listen to music, you literally can't feel sadness.
No, I don't think so. I think it's arguing that without dedicated, effective stimulus, the emotional workout provided by Altarfe, those feelings can remain underdeveloped. They can be dormant or inaccessible.
So you might have the capacity for profound love, for example, but without those external triggers, a song, a film, a story, that feeling may never be fully activated or understood in its full breadth.
Exactly. It's a pragmatic recognition that emotion is absolutely essential to the human experience. And entertainment is the primary, universal tool we use to access and cultivate that spectrum.
So to deny the emotional engine its necessary fuel
is to end up with an incomplete, emotionally stunted person. Even if they are perfectly morally guided, the source seems to argue that both knowledge and joy are essential components. You can't just pick one.
Okay, so now let's detail Chain B, the influence path for this emotional engine. If songs are the primary catalyst for feelings, the hierarchy has to be different from Chain A.
It's flipped. The sequence is songs lead to feelings, and those feelings then influence the conscience.
Songs, feelings, conscience.
In Chain A, remember, the input, the Quran, generates the feeling through the filter of the conscience.
Right. It was a guided outcome.
But in JB, the input, the songs, the entertainment, it generates the raw feeling immediately, instantly, and only afterwards does that raw emotion influence the conscience.
Ah, so the conscience is put into a reactive state.
Precisely. It's not proactively guiding the emotion. It's being forced to reconcile its foundational knowledge with a powerful, immediate emotional state that has already been created.
I like the analogy we were talking about earlier. Chain A is like building a house using a blueprint. It's proactive, it's guided, it's stable.
Right.
Chain B is like trying to redesign the house after an emotional earthquake has already hit. The conscience is dealing with the fact of an intense emotion, often before the intellect has even had time to process it.
That's a great way to put it. And this is why Chain B is so often the source of our internal conflict. For example, a really engaging film evokes intense pity. That powerful feeling immediately influences your conscience.
And it causes you to donate a huge sum of money, impulsively, maybe without fully considering the long-term impact on your own stability.
Exactly. The feeling dictated the action, and the conscience was left to play catch-up. It ends up justifying the impulse rather than guiding it from the start.
So we've established these two powerful yet functionally contrasting engines. The spiritual path, chain A, is the source of moral, proactive stability.
And the emotional path, chain B, is the source of affective activation and, what the source considers necessary human experience.
And the real challenge, which I guess we'll get into next, is that these two chains are not designed to just run in parallel in isolation from each other.
Not at all. They are in constant dynamic reciprocal contact. And that contact ensures that the human experience is neither cold and sterile nor chaotic and unguided.
This is where it gets really complex. This is where the source material moves from just, identifying the parts to explaining the true complexity of human life.
Right. It posits that these two systems are in constant motion. They're in this interlocking reciprocal relationship that forms the core mechanism of the self.
And there's a specific quote for that, isn't there?
Yes, and it's stated so simply and so powerfully. Conscience drives the feelings, and the feelings drive the conscience.
A perfect loop.
It's not just a simple cycle. It's a dynamic, two-way feedback loop. And it's running constantly in the background of every single moment of your life.
So let's try to synthesize the two chains we just detailed to see how they fit into this loop. I think this helps us understand how the starting point can really determine the immediate outcome.
Okay, let's start with chain A. We called it the spiritual start. This is the stabilizing mechanism. The Quran feeds into a grounded conscience. And this grounded conscience then actively drives the feelings component of the cycle.
So your knowledge leads your conscience to generate a feeling.
Right. The resulting emotion, let's say it's humility or gratitude, that emotion then reinforces the conscience because the outcome aligned perfectly with the initial knowledge. It's a positive feedback loop.
Okay, that makes sense. Then we have the other side, chain B, the effective start.
The reactive mechanism. Songs or entertainment feed immediately, directly into feelings. This raw, immediate feeling then pushes back. It drives the conscience component of the cycle. It forces the conscience to react to the emotional reality that has just been created out of thin air.
So the output of one chain immediately becomes the input for the other.
Constantly. For instance, a feeling of intense joy driven by a moment of entertainment, so that's the chain B. That joy may suddenly make the conscience more receptive to sharing and generosity.
So the feeling primes the conscience for a good action.
Yes, and in that moment, it can initiate a positive guided action. So the conscience then outputs a positive behavior, which starts a new chain A cycle. It's all connected.
But the more critical scenario, I think, is the clash. This cycle is precisely what explains our common internal conflicts. I mean, you, the listener, you feel this every single day.
Absolutely.
You know intellectually, that's your conscience, guided by knowledge, that you should be doing a difficult, long-term, constructive task. But you feel an intense, immediate pull. That's the feeling. Driven by the instant gratification of modern tarfie, like a video game or a social media scroll.
And the conflict, the real battle, lies in which input wins that specific moment. Let's take a more concrete example. Imagine a person has been rigorously practicing their spiritual guidance, so they're strengthening chain A.
Okay, so their conscience is well-fueled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then they encounter a piece of highly political, emotionally charged entertainment, maybe a fictional story or a really heavily biased documentary. This triggers intense anger, feelings of injustice. That's chain B kicking in, hard.
Right, so the raw emotion, the anger, it just floods the system. And the conscience, the mutahakam, the controller, now has to process this.
Now, if that conscience is robust, because it has been consistently fueled by the Quran, it can analyze that raw anger. It can channel it constructively.
How so?
Well, it could channel it into prayer or into seeking a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the issue or into organized positive action. The key is that the conscience dictates the response to the emotion.
But the alternative?
However, if the conscience is weak, if chain A has been neglected, and the person is already running on a deficit of ilm, of knowledge, that raw, intense anger simply takes over.
The feeling dictates the act.
The feeling dictates the action. It bypasses the filter of the conscience completely, and it leads directly to destructive behavior. Aggressive language, impulsive, poorly considered choices. The conscience is just overwhelmed. It's reacting to the emotional wave instead of steering the ship through it.
That is such a crucial connection. The strength of the conscience, which is derived from the strength of the Quran input, that determines your ability to navigate the powerful emotional input you get from tarfi.
It's the whole game. If the intellectual foundation is strong, the emotional input enriches your life. It adds color and depth. But if that intellectual foundation is weak, the very same emotional input destabilizes your life.
It really is a system of checks and balances then.
It has to be. The emotional input prevents the conscience from becoming overly rigid or detached or clinical. It ensures the self remains fully human, capable of love and hate and joy and sorrow.
But the intellectual input, the other side, ensures that those powerful, necessary feelings don't lead to chaos and self-destruction.
Exactly.
So the overall goal isn't the elimination of one chain or the other. It's about mastering the feedback loop itself. You need the emotional input to prevent emotional sterility.
And you need the spiritual input to ensure that the emotional input doesn't cause a moral collapse. The failure to manage this interplay is instability. That's the definition of it.
Which leads us, very logically, to the required solution. How do we intentionally manage this relentless cycle to make sure the system stays functional and, durable over a whole lifetime?
And the source provides an extremely clear, practical strategy for achieving this necessary harmony.
Okay, so we've defined the dual drivers, we've mapped their constant reciprocal relationship. Now the source material moves directly into the solution, the prescription for maintaining a functional, integrated self.
Right. And they explicitly call for balance. The word is tawazun, balance between the Quran and entertainment, al-tarfeh. This is the structural mandate for internal stability.
It's the core principle.
It is. But what's so fascinating is that the source doesn't just stop at the philosophical mandate. It doesn't just say, be balanced. It immediately provides the practical application.
And this is the detail that makes this whole analysis so impactful, so actionable. It's the hour-for-hour rule.
That's it. The source advises an hour for the Quran and an hour for entertainment.
Fasatun lil Quran wa satun lil tarfeh.
Exactly. This is the operationalization of Tawazun. It suggests parity. Equal, dedicated time should be given to both the foundational engine, the spiritual knowledge, the conscience formation, and the affective engine, the emotional stimulus, the necessary human feeling.
That's a very high standard. I mean, it insists on dedicating as much intentional time to fueling the conscience as we naturally dedicate to fueling our feelings. Most people probably don't do that.
Probably not. But the rationale behind this strict balance is even more crucial than the rule itself, and it speaks directly to sustainability. Why demand this structured balance?
The source gives a reason.
It does. The goal is so that we do not tire of the Quran or entertainment.
Hatta la naman min al-Quran al-tarfeh. So we don't get bored or exhausted by either one.
Let's dedicate some real time to unpacking that phrase, hatta la namal, so we do not tire, because it reveals the source's deep, deep understanding of human psychology.
Okay, let's take the first case. If a person commits too heavily only to the spiritual, intellectual path and they neglect the emotional need for tarfi, what happens?
They risk spiritual rigidity, they risk emotional starvation, and eventually they risk total exhaustion, burnout.
The conscience, while it might be perfectly guided, becomes emotionally barren. And the self, the human part of us, starts to demand that essential component of feeling. Eventually, the sustained denial of this effective need leads to resentment.
Resentment towards the spiritual practice itself.
Right. They tire of the Quran because, in their mind, it has become associated with a life that's devoid of necessary human vibrancy, a life that feels gray.
Exactly. Now, conversely, if a person engages only in continuous, unguided emotional stimulus, a life dictated entirely by al-tarfi, what's the consequence then?
Well, they may never tire of entertainment in the immediate sense. It's designed to be engaging.
True. But they will tire of the consequences of constant reaction. They'll experience moral chaos, superficiality, a life constantly being thrown around by the whims of transient desires.
The conscience, operating without its fuel, without ilm, it just fatigues, and then it collapses. So they tire of the instability their entertainment-driven life has created.
This balance, therefore, is an act of preservation for both sides of the self. The spiritual grounding from the Quran ensures that the feelings stimulated by entertainment are channeled constructively, not destructively.
And the emotional outlet provided by entertainment ensures that the spiritual practice remains sustainable. It keeps it fully human and engaging. It prevents that rigidity that comes from pure emotional suppression.
The hour-for-hour rule is an acknowledgement of the reality of human energy. The conscience, our primary governor, it needs regular, dedicated refueling with ilm to maintain its strength against the powerful, often overwhelming input from the emotional engine.
If you're constantly running the emotional engine at full blast without simultaneously reinforcing the moral infrastructure,
The whole system just breaks down. It's inevitable.
we should also probably recognize that this concept of tawazun contrasts really sharply with how modern society often views balance. We talk about work-life balance, for example.
Right, which usually means minimizing stress or maximizing leisure time.
Exactly. But this source is proposing something deeper. It's an internal architecture balance. It's a moral and emotional requirement, not just a lifestyle choice. It insists that both knowledge and joy are essential work, and that this work must be done with intentional, equal time.
And what is the promised outcome? What do you get if you achieve this structured dynamic balance? The sources conclude with the ultimate goal.
Which is
If this tawazun, this balance between the Quran and entertainment occurs, the human lives a stable life. Ya'ish al-insan haya mutazina.
Haya mutazina, a
Yeah.
stable life. And that definition of stability is so crucial here. It's not a static, motionless state. It's not about being flat.
No, it's dynamic harmony. It's a life where the two engines are constantly correcting each other, checking each other, and fueling each other.
So the knowledge directs the conscience.
And the feelings are acknowledged, experienced, and channeled correctly. This ensures the intellectual system and the emotional system support each other, and it prevents their mutual exhaustion.
The genius of it is really in the simplicity of the prescription.
It is. It just accepts the reality that we are both. We are spiritual beings who require guidance, and we are emotional beings who require effective input. And the path to internal peace isn't exclusion. It's not about choosing one over the other.
It's about structured, intentional inclusion of both drivers.
That's the whole model. This deep dive gives us the foundational mechanics that conscience and feeling are primary reciprocal drivers. And it gives us the practical mechanics, the hour-for-hour balance.
And the stability of our entire internal architecture depends completely on honoring both of these needs equally and understanding that they feed a single dynamic cycle.
A beautiful summary.
So we've traced the internal wiring of the self according to this really fascinating source material. We began with the primary engine, the Quran and conscience path.
Right, which provides the essential knowledge, the ilm, and the ethical guidance that ensures the self isn't just controlled by pure desire, by hawa.
And then we explored the other side, the powerful and necessary emotional engine, the songs and emotion path.
Which ensures the self remains fully effective, that it can access the entire spectrum of human feeling, love, hate, happiness, sadness, and it prevents a kind of emotional impoverishment.
The key realization, though, I think for me, is the cyclical nature of the influence. Conscience drives feelings, and then feelings drive conscience.
It's a reciprocal loop that requires constant active management, lest one force completely overwhelm the other.
And the power of that hour-for-hour prescription is just immense, not because it's some, strict moral imperative.
But because it's a strategy for sustainability, it's practical. It ensures that knowledge and joy are mutually supportive. It prevents either the rigors of spiritual life or the chaos of emotional life from leading to system exhaustion and total failure.
Haya mutazina, the stable life. That's the reward for honoring both of these fundamental needs.
It is.
So as you integrate this structure, consider this final provocative thought. It builds directly on the source's wisdom of avoiding fatigue, of avoiding burnout.
Look at your current routine.
Yeah, just look at it honestly. Which forced spiritual learning or dedicated healthy entertainment is currently dominant in your life? And what might happen to the stability of your internal system if you intentionally adopted that hour-for-hour mandate? If you adjusted your balance, starting today, to ensure that neither pursuit leads to exhaustion, but instead both of them lead to a full, sustained engagement with life.